Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, well, it cuts right to the heart of modern finance and technology, addressing the fundamental nature of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. And the source material we're looking at frames this in, let's say, the most extreme terms possible, either a revolution for the internet and financial systems globally,
Right.
or, maybe more bluntly, the greatest Ponzi scheme in human history.
And that stark contrast is really the perfect entry point for us.
The central question we have to address is whether the rapid ascent of crypto valuation and this expansion of Web3 applications, does it represent a legitimate, maybe even necessary technological solution for systemic financial problems?
Or is it fundamentally something else? A sophisticated, speculative mechanism that relies really heavily on behavioral hype and just successive waves of new investment to keep it afloat.
Exactly. So today I'll be arguing that crypto is an essential defense against systemic currency debasement and an inevitable technological revolution, providing necessary non-correlated assets for financial stability.
And I'll be contending that its primary function, despite the rhetoric, remains organized wealth transfer. It uses these highly sophisticated speculative incentive mechanisms, all carefully masked by the language of, revolutionary technology and decentralization.
Okay, so let me start. To truly understand the hyper-appreciation of crypto, you have to recognize it's not just some high-risk gamble. It's become a necessary response. It's a response to a predictable and I'd say repeating pattern of fiat currency decay. When we look at the global financial health, the system is fundamentally crippled by debt. It sits at over 400% of global GDP.
400%, yeah.
Yeah. And because of the continuous liquidity injection by central banks, a hidden, critical pattern emerges. And this is the key insight I think most people miss. The currency itself devalues faster than traditional investments can possibly grow. The source material shows that when we factor in currency debasement plus inflation, the real rate of annual purchasing power loss averages about, get this, 11%.
11%, wow.
So if you invest in traditional markets, say the S&P 500, which historically returns about 11% annually, well, your nominal wealth might go up, but your real wealth creation is effectively zero. It's like running on a treadmill. Only assets that offer truly exponential returns, like Bitcoin, which has averaged 145% annual growth since 2011, only those offer an escape hatch from that systemic debt trap. For many, this is just financial survival. And furthermore, we are seeing a historical pattern, what some call a crypto reset, repeat itself. Governments and central banks, they historically devalue debt to manage crises. I mean, look at 1933 with the gold confiscation, or 1971 closing the gold window. Today, that mechanism is being implemented through the intersection of stablecoins and US debt. Stablecoins, projected to hit nearly $4 trillion in value by 2030, are legally required to back their pegs with US Treasuries.
Right, the Treasury backing is key.
It is. They create guaranteed massive demand for US debt, effectively exporting inflation and devaluing our, $37 trillion national debt. And the world's central banks, they recognize this pattern. That's why they've bought an unprecedented 4,000 tons of gold in just 4 years. They're preparing for the debt reckoning, and crypto is simply the next iteration of that flight to non-sovereign scarcity.
Okay, that's a compelling argument about the necessity driven by fiat devaluation. But I would frame the operational reality very differently. The persistent, almost desperate search for a new revolutionary use case is, in my view, actually proof of the underlying technical failure, not its success. The core pattern here is, I think, much simpler. It's an extraction machine, a machine where early investors are paid using the money of new investors. We really can't ignore that Bitcoin, it failed its original goal as a functional global currency. The technical limitations are just insurmountable for that purpose. 7 transactions per second versus Visa's, 1,700? That scaling issue alone eliminates it for everyday transactions. That's why the narrative had to pivot to digital gold. And let's not forget the high energy consumption of proof-of-work mining. That whole arms race runs contrary to any reasonable vision for future technology.
But proof-of-stake addresses much of that.
It addresses the energy, perhaps, but not the core speculative repackaging. What does the industry do when one narrative fails? It's forced to constantly repackage speculation. We went from the ICO mania, which included blatant scams like, remember Ponzi coin raising $250,000 while openly admitting it was a Ponzi scheme?
Yes, those were clear scams, but not representative of the whole.
But the pattern continued. Then we got the NFT craze, and the source material reveals the frankly sheer theater behind that $69.3 million Beeple NFT sale. It was purchased by a crypto entrepreneur, Metacoven, in what looks very much like a staged marketing stunt specifically designed to pump the value of his associated B20 token. And critically, Metacoven already owned 59% of that B20 supply himself. The system thrives on this kind of sophisticated social engineering. The wag me, we're all gonna make it, the hodl, hold on for dear life, rhetoric, and immediately dismissing any criticism as FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. It ensures new money continually flows into the machine, mainly for the benefit of insiders and venture capital.
Okay, let's talk about those incentives.
Yeah, because I'm really not convinced by the claim that utility drives the valuation. It seems to fundamentally ignore the actual observable flow of capital and the structure of the profit mechanism. The overwhelming majority of tokens in practice are utilized essentially as unregistered securities, and they're being dumped onto the retail public by venture firms. This is the insider pattern that grants that competitive advantage you mentioned earlier.
But is that the only pattern?
Look at the playbook of entities like Andreessen Horowitz. They have billions dedicated to Web3 investment. They buy tokens early at huge discounts. Then they utilize massive hype cycles, often involving celebrity promotions coordinated through services like MoonPay, to basically accelerate liquidation onto retail buyers within months. And they do it in a largely unregulated environment. The tragedy of the play-to-earn model Axie Infinity is just the perfect example of this incentive structure prioritizing liquidation over any genuine utility. It promised wealth, attracted impoverished players in developing nations, but it was designed fundamentally to extract value from them, which led to the underlying token SLP falling, 99%? The core pattern seems crystal clear to me. The VC incentive is a liquidation first, utility maybe second, if at all.
I see why you'd think that, especially when the focus is placed entirely on those initial liquidity mechanics and some admittedly bad actors. But let me give you a different perspective, one that focuses on the fundamental infrastructure actually being built here. Focusing only on the speculative excesses misses the genuine technological layer shift that's occurring beneath the surface, a layer, I'd argue, as critical as the internet itself was in its early days.
Okay.
Ethereum, often called the world computer, enables smart contracts. And these aren't just toys. They solve the millennia-old Byzantine generals problem in a digital age. The challenge of achieving consensus among independent parties where some might be malicious or unreliable. By providing a verifiable, immutable source of truth, blockchains transitions from just a theoretical curiosity to necessary infrastructure. If the technology wasn't genuinely useful, the returns would simply cease, wouldn't they? Like we saw with all those failed ICOs you mentioned?
But is the adoption widespread enough to justify the valuations?
Well, it's transitioning from theory to necessary adoption, often in the background. We are seeing major soft commodity trading houses who operate in an industry just rife with counterparty risk, putting every single shipment contract on chain since about 2020. Why? Because they need that verifiable, shared source of truth. Even DocuSign uses blockchain hashing now to record agreements immutably. This is fundamental infrastructure being adopted quietly to solve real, very costly problems. The outsized returns? I see them as simply the feature that compensates early investors for the necessary risk of funding and bootstrapping this next layer of the internet.
That's a compelling argument about the theoretical power of immutability. I'll grant you that. But have you considered the rapid and fundamental re-centralization of this supposedly decentralized ideal? That seems to undermine the core promise.
How so, specifically?
Well, the system is structurally re-centralizing. Major purchases happen on centralized exchanges, Coinbase, Binance, which by necessity must comply with centralized institutions and regulators. That directly contradicts the core ethos of being non-sovereign, doesn't it? Mining is now dominated by massive, capital-intensive warehouse farms. And token distribution, as we saw with the B20 example, is often highly concentrated, where insiders own more than half the supply right from the start. This structure allows VCs and early adopters to maintain control and profit from pretty significant information asymmetry. We see this pattern constantly. For instance, the source mentions the MoonPay CEO, Ivan Soto-Wright, purchasing a major NFT right before celebrities announced their adoption, clearly leveraging insider information for profit. Decentralization in practice often feels like a myth, a narrative used primarily to obscure centralized control points and the lucrative opportunities presented by knowing things others don't.
Okay, I agree that high asset concentration is perhaps a necessary evil in the early phases of anti-disruptive technology. Venture capital kind of dictates early ownership structure. That's just how it works. But I'd argue true decentralization isn't merely the avoidance of large institutions. It's achieved through immutability and the empowerment of individual financial sovereignty.
Explain that distinction.
The ability for anyone, anywhere in the world to acquire fractionalized ownership of a globally homogeneous asset like Bitcoin that bypasses the traditional banking and brokerage systems that systematically restrict investment access based on geography, wealth, or nationality. It actually democratizes access to wealth creation in a way that wasn't possible before. And this brings us to what I think is the most powerful, maybe the most shareable insight here: the utility of a private key secured on a hardware wallet. That small string of words grants the user absolute ownership and freedom from government seizure or bank freezes. Unlike fiat currency in a bank account, which is ultimately just an IOU, a liability of the bank.
Okay.
To secure your entire net worth against debasement and potential seizure, globally, using just a phrase only you control, that level of financial sovereignty, that is the true revolutionary decentralization that actually matters to people.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the current technical utility justifies the sheer scale of market capitalization we're witnessing. I think the technology is potentially brilliant for future applications. Web3, yes, where NFTs act as verifiable receipts of ownership for everything from digital assets to potentially even legal records. The disruption is becoming evident in gaming, where true ownership of in-game assets like a rare sword or a FIFA card allows them to be traded outside the game. That creates brand new, valuable economies. This indicates profound potential.
Right. Potential that needs funding and development.
But the operational reality today is that these use cases are often just solutions in search of a problem, or they're simply repackaged versions of existing centralized services, usually introduced merely to fuel the next speculative cycle. We really have to apply Nicholas Weaver's iron law of blockchain here. When somebody says you can solve X with blockchain, they probably don't understand X, and you can just ignore them.
That seems overly dismissive of genuine innovation.
Let's take your example of turning a legal contract into a smart contract. That completely ignores the legal necessity of third-party assessment of intent, context, nuance, things that code, by its nature, cannot handle. The failure isn't in the code itself. It's in applying an immutable, fixed logic to a fluid, inherently human-centric system like law. So what's the undeniable driver here? It's the social phenomenon, and this is the hidden pattern that really explains the behavioral hype. This system is fueled by the desperate need of the younger generation, specifically, say, 30-year-olds, who are, statistically, the first generation likely to be less wealthy than their parents, trapped by student debt, unaffordable housing.
A tough situation, certainly.
They need to find a high-risk, high-reward solution to, forgive the phrase, unfuck their future. The culture, the FUD dismissal, the diamond hands rhetoric, it's sophisticated behavioral economics. It's designed to keep them invested and, crucially, recruiting new capital. It's not primarily about a genuine technological solution to a systemic problem. The hype isn't an accident. It is the necessary energy source for the extraction machine to keep running.
So, summarizing my view, the material demonstrates that the unprecedented wealth creation opportunity in crypto is born out of financial necessity, not simply greed. The pattern of fiat debasement is clear. It's repeating. Currency is effectively devaluing at around 11% annually, demanding a non-correlated, potentially hyper-appreciating asset like crypto. Focusing solely on the speculative excesses, and yes, the poor behavior of a few VCs, misses the critical disruptive function of the underlying technology. It's becoming a verifiable source of digital truth and value transfer, making it, I believe, a critical asset for risk management and wealth preservation for the next decade.
And from my perspective, while the potential for technological utility is undeniable, the operational reality, the thing that grants the true competitive advantage right now, is the system's structural optimization for insider profit. It achieves this through manufactured hype cycles and the continuous behaviorally driven recruitment of new investors. The strong evidence of sophisticated social engineering and these repeated speculative bubbles suggests that for most retail participants, this is a highly optimized, frankly dangerous repeat of historical get-rich-quick schemes. It's just one designed by computer scientists this time, rather than traditional bankers.
Ultimately, I think we both agree that a significant pattern shift in how value is stored and transferred is definitely underway.
The shift itself isn't really in question. It's the nature and the outcome of that shift, whether it leads toward widespread democratization of finance and empowerment through individual sovereignty, as you hope, or whether it merely creates a highly efficient new funnel for wealth concentration based on information asymmetry and technical savvy. Well, that remains the critical, shareable insight, I suppose.
And the listener must now decide which pattern they believe will dominate the future of money and the internet.